GEM International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond producing country in Africa, located next to the fourth largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109 carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. GEM International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is real estate expert Ross Kay from the wealthyhomeowner.ca. Welcome to the show, Ross.
Hey, thanks for having me back, Jim.
Ross, in the last 4 weeks, newspapers have been cluttered with comments like record listings, sales tumbling, and bidding wars continuing to be reported in the Toronto market. Yet at 4 o'clock Toronto time, the real estate agents who have been cited with claiming those facts are silent. What's the deal here, Ross?
What's the deal? Well, it's kind of been funny for us here watching as the scrambling and the guessing and the explanation that are rolled out over the last, say 60 days here for the Ontario market. They're almost as hilarious as the ones that were rolled out in British Columbia, basically about the same time last year. The parallels between the comments of the two markets a year apart, it's just astounding how similar the guessing is that is taking place, gets picked up by the newspapers. We read in the papers about the Toronto market that in May listings had jumped like 40%, that it was a record jump in the number of listings, and that was the cause why the sales had dropped off. We read about record prices being set in March. We heard some numbers for Ontario that were the same numbers that we had for British Columbia, where you heard the comments about 60% year-over-year gains on some property. And we're hearing the same thing right now that we had out in British Columbia around August of last year, where all of the realtors who want to pretend to be housing market analysis were caught off guard and they couldn't provide an answer. The same thing has happened here on the Ontario market, and that's happened in the media today. So all of those people, all of the realtors, the analysts, the economists who were appearing on these shows over the last couple of years are not out there today. And yet here we are. It's the 4th of July. Year-end data, month-end data, the same bad data that they've used for the last 4 decades, is available, but they're not commenting on it. So what they're finding is the crazy assumption, the false hypothesis that they put forward, simply are not coming to be true now that the data has rolled out for June. This is the same thing that we're seeing in British Columbia, where you're hearing now comments about your housing market going back up again. So in Ontario here, the realtors, your listeners have to understand, unless someone has studied a real estate market for decades, and what I mean by decades is they have covered a full realty cycle, which means a market that goes through a full correction, goes back up to its peak again on the next rise, and then corrects again. Unless they have monitored and studied a full cycle as it's rolled out, alongside working in that marketplace with thousands of home buyers, homeowners, and home sellers, they have no idea of how a market functions. So what we're seeing today is a bunch of real estate agents and economists and analysts caught off guard. They can't explain month-end data, and they're going to struggle to come up with some kind of a conclusion over the next couple of days so that they can reappear in the media trying to insinuate that they actually have something valid that the public should listen to when they're commenting on the market. So that's what's taking place in Ontario today. We know that. We track the markets totally different. So when they were claiming these record listing gains, we were laughing because we know how the listings are counted. We know that the bump in listings from May was a consequence of business that was actually done in April. But because we monitor markets with so many different metrics and the precision that we're able to know what's going on in a marketplace because of those metrics, we know what a decision that is made today will end up showing up a month, 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, 8 months later in real estate data. So we know that the market numbers that everybody's going to be hearing here over the next, starting tomorrow and then over for the next 2 weeks, those market numbers were already decided months ago. These things are unavoidable. The people that are talking about them, they don't understand that. They haven't researched the market. They haven't been able to develop the metrics to measure every single point in a market that you have to track. Now, it's not complicated. If you know what you're looking for, you know how to interpret the data, you know how to throw out the bad data, put in the good data. You can need to look at all the different points where you can vet any specific metric that you're going to use. And then you can come up with a scenario to explain what's going on in the sales stats that will be released any given month. And that's what's happening with your Toronto market. Now, nobody can explain what's going on in Toronto except us, the same way that nobody can explain what's happening in BC except our conclusions. Our conclusions in British Columbia have all been proven true, the same way that they were proven in Calgary back in 2014. These things, this is not a, you're not an idiot savant, you're not a mind reader, you're not a Houdini. You're simply looking at the metrics. You know what the metrics are telling you, and you know what consequence that's going to have in the market months later.
So, Ross, what I want to know, what are the real facts for Toronto, Vancouver, and the rest of Canada?
Okay, so let's start with your home market there, Vancouver. If you check the newspapers, you're going to see over the last 2 months, realtors, analysts, and economists have all claimed that your market is recovered. In other words, the previous slowing of the market from last year, which we know was falsely attributed to the foreign buyer tax, which subsequently 8 to 10 months later, now it's being stated that, the market was already correcting before the tax was brought in, which back at this time last year, we were the only source for that intelligence. And as of today, we're still the only people who have the metrics that actually measured when that was happening and could actually explain it with data. What you're watching out in British Columbia, this is another point that they don't understand. As a matter of fact, we're going to start our writing a blog here for the members, and they're going to have access to this information as part of their membership at no charge, because there's been so many new false assumptions that have been put out there in the media over the last 2 months. When a market starts to contract, that means your sales volumes start to decrease, and then it starts to correct, meaning your price starts to correct. There is always what we call. So we've had to come up with a name for this ourselves. It's called a contraction bump. And what a contraction bump is, depending on how the real estate market is structured, as it's entering a contraction and correction, dictates whether you're going to see an artificial blip in price, increase in price, anywhere from 6 to 18 months after the correction begins. Now, these contraction bumps have happened every single time there's been a contracting or a correcting housing market since 1980. So that's as far back as our data goes for accuracy. So back to 1980 till today, every single time there has been a contraction. There has been a contraction bump. I'm sitting here talking to you today, looking at my full data for the last from 1980 forward. And when I look at the data, I see that Ontario, which entered its correction, its previous correction, the way that we measure it, it would have entered it in December of 1989, all that long ago. It experienced its contraction bump beginning in February of 1991. So there it took 14 months, 13 to 14 months, somewhere in that neighborhood, because it happened mid-month, for the contraction bump to happen. That created the illusion that the housing market was starting to get increase in prices again. These contraction bumps generally result in a market stopping because real estate boards, real estate agents, analysts, economists don't understand how or why or what a contraction bump is. So they misinterpret it as if the market has changed. The market has swinged back another way. Then they start to appear in newspapers telling the public, oh, things are looking better. Consumers accept what is being told to them as the truth, and they start going out and participating in the market a little bit more. When that happens, then the contraction bump just turns into another trading cycle. What we have here, though, is we have the contraction bump in British Columbia. It's now coming in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It was started in the 10th month of the correction out there. The other metrics that we use to measure the market means that it's not going to pull itself back out. There is not the market is not structured that it's going to go on long enough where people get fooled. There will be a few people fooled over a couple of months, making some bad home buying decisions because they're not getting the right market intelligence. But the vast majority of people, they're not going to react, and that will result in the bump being eradicated and the market continue on its downward trend.
We'll have more with Ross Kay right after the break.
I'm Bill McWilliam, president of Cascadero Copper, CCD on the TSX Venture Exchange. Cesium is one of the world's rarest metals with a growing industrial demand. Drilling is underway on our Tehran property in Argentina to prove up a cesium resource. Cascadero's patent-pending leach process has the potential to make Cascadero the lowest cost supplier of cesium in the world. Visit our website, cascadero.com, or phone us at 604-924-5504.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Ross Kay. Ross, they're talking about ending double dipping on commissions in Ontario. Is that something we should be looking at BC? And the definition of that is having a real estate agent representing both the buyer and seller.
Yeah, so there's a good question. That's appeared here out in Ontario. That's the topic that they brought up. And right now they're in a 1-month consultation period where they're looking for, the government is looking for some insights into this issue. This is one of the few issues. I used to get angry about real estate stats, how it was released, how misleading statements are made by CMHC, the banks, the realtors, everyone else. Until I understood it's not that they're doing this deceptively, they are genuinely ignorant on how a housing market functions. Now, this is a little bit different case. Although the government is ignorant to how dual agency impacts the trading of a home, the organized real estate is not. Because I was involved in this battle 25 years ago. And there were a few voices in Canada who wanted to end the practice altogether. Now, my family led that cause in Ontario because we wanted it to end. Now, we could afford to have it end because we were such strong listing agents at the time. Our business, people were calling us left, right, and center simply to list their home. We were at a point where we didn't even need to advertise. And when a market is correcting and people are faced with losing equity in their homes, they don't just call up their friends and relatives anymore. They start looking for the people who are the experts in the business who are getting results. And these are not your flippant salespeople results. These are true results where you're saving people money. So at that time, when the dual agency discussion was ongoing, we just said, end it. We don't think you should do it. We think it's wrong. But our voice was very, very small. There was a very small group of us across Canada. In Ontario, there was maybe about 25 successful realtors at the time who agreed that it should end, but the other 99.9% didn't want it to end. Now, the reason why they don't want it to end is this. Real estate brand franchising companies like RE/MAX International USA, Brookfield, which owns Royal LePage trademark, the Royal LePage brand, Realogy down in the United States, which owns Century 21, Caldwell Banker, Realty Executives, Prudential. They own a whole slew of these real estate brand trademarks. Those companies are not actually real estate companies, which is one of the reasons why when you hear a real estate report from Royal LePage or RE/MAX or Sotheby's, just throw it in the garbage, because these are not real estate companies. They never have been. They never will be. They are simply real estate brand franchisers. They will license their trademark to you and then allow you to use that to build your real estate business. They do it through the brokerages, and now, most recently now they're doing it through what we call sub-brokerages, where they do another franchise agreement with an individual realtor. Those franchise brands, which control the real estate market, they control the Canadian Real Estate Association. They control all of the local real estate boards. They control them. They control them because the users of their brands are the voting members of those associations. They are the presidents. The board members on those associations all have signed up to license those trademark brands. Very seldom will you find an independent broker on a trade association board of directors. Those real estate brands cannot afford to have dual agency end. So they want the double dipping, because if dual agency ended, that means the death of the franchise brands. The consumers are being misled in this argument. What your listeners need to understand is this. If you list your property with a brokerage or any agent, sales rep, who is working at that brokerage, your listing is listed with the brokerage. If you are a buyer working with any sales rep at that same brokerage and want to purchase that home, it's automatically a conflict of interest and dual agency happens. In other words, they're representing both the buyer and the seller's interest. Go ask a lawyer if this is possible. Under any legal context, can a party try to get, can you contract with the same party that agrees to get one side of the transaction the highest price and the other side of the transaction the lowest price? You will not find a lawyer who's still employed who will answer yes to that question. They'll all tell you it's impossible. As a matter of fact, most real estate lawyers now no longer represent both the buyer and the seller. They will only represent one side of a transaction. So if a lawyer has a long-standing contract with a relationship with a homeowner who sold 2 or 3 homes using the lawyer's office, and they say, hey, I just sold my house, here's the deal, and then a real estate agent or a sales rep calls up the lawyer and says, hey, I just got a new home buyer. They just purchased a home over at 123 Smith Street. If the lawyer realizes, or as soon as the lawyer realizes, that he's already representing the seller, or she's already representing the seller, she'll tell the real estate agent, no, you got to go find another lawyer, because it's a conflict of interest. It is impossible. I need to stress this. Impossible for any brokerage to represent both sides of the transaction. What is going on right now? It happened out in British Columbia with your limited dual agency myth. It is impossible. Limited dual agency compromises the consumer. They're trying to do the same thing in Ontario here. Why are they doing it? The only reason they're doing it is for their own selfish interests. I wouldn't care if this was the interest of the brokerage. That would be a little bit different. I could understand the selfishness. I could sort of understand why they're willing to mislead and lie to the consumer. But when it's for the interest, because in Canada, all of these real estate franchise brand, or real estate brand franchisers, other than Royal LePage, which is owned by Brookfield, all the other ones are American companies, folks. Every single one. I know you've got Sutton Group out your way. Well, Sutton Group is not quite the same as the others. I'm not even going to call it a franchise brand company anymore, because it's really just a group of brokers who got together, and they stayed together when the other parts of their company left. But all of Century 21, Caldwell Bank, Royal LePage, Remax, Prudential, Sotheby's, Engel and Volkers, all of those corporations, other than Royal LePage, which is owned by Brookfield, are not owned by a Canadian firm. We cannot allow this deception to go on. This deception must end. That's one of the reasons we have a housing bubble today. One of the reasons is because there has been no true exclusive buyer brokerage in Canada. We've watched what's gone on down in the States for 30 years with this argument. MLS associations and the real estate brand franchising companies have been working against every state government in the United States for decades to stop, to continue to allow dual agency to exist. The beautiful part about today is, and in Canada today is, as we're entering this next period of home ownership price change, is that we have Google, we have the internet, we have years and years and years of fraudulent statements made by all of these companies, recorded in the internet's archives, and we're going to see a radical change to how real estate is bought and sold, and what is being proposed in Ontario, which is the same thing that's currently ongoing in British Columbia. It will not be the final result. What's coming will be revolutionary, not evolutionary.
We'll have more with Ross Kay right after this.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Keep informed. Receive our weekly recap of thought-provoking articles, podcasts, and radio delivered to your inbox for free. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage, HoweStreet.com. Welcome back. We're chatting with Ross Kay. Ross, the Bank of Canada is going to make an interest rate decision next week before the Canadian Real Estate Association releases its June housing data. What are your thoughts on this?
What are my thoughts on this? I'm not an economist. I don't know how the economy works. I know what parts of the economy are impacted by real estate, and I know what that means. I cannot understand how the Bank of Canada is going to make an interest rate decision prior to analyzing June's housing data. What I mean to say is this. It is impossible to analyze a previous month's housing data during the first 2 weeks of the following month. It is impossible. When we're quoting our numbers, we're always quoting numbers that are actually a couple of weeks delayed. And even though we're doing that, we're so far ahead of everybody else, it doesn't matter. But we know that we need to take longer to be able to wait for the data to come in, adjust it, in other words, throw out the crappy parts, pull in the correct parts, put all the pieces back together so you're actually looking at the market for how it's functioning. The Bank of Canada is going to make an interest rate decision without knowing what happened to June's housing market. Now, this is what your listeners need to understand from this comment. Right now, in Canada, 54% of every housing dollar that is being traded through organized real estate comes for the province of Ontario. That is a staggering 22% increase during this trading cycle. 22%. If the Ontario housing market has been correcting for the few months that my firm would say it's been correcting for, which will end up showing up possibly in June, possibly in July data. We know that the way that they do their numbers, we know how it's going to roll out. The Bank of Canada should not be making an interest rate decision without knowing how the single largest asset class in this country is performing. Is housing affordability getting worse or better? What impact does a 0.25% increase in mortgage interest rates on discounted mortgage interest rates, which is all that matters, what impact is that going to have in the market? Will that impact be multiplied because of the new mortgage regulations that are out there right now, which were not in effect the last time interest rates were rose by the Bank of Canada? What your listeners need to understand is, right now, you have to qualify at 4.64% to get a mortgage insured with CMHC. That has constrained the number of first-time buyers to the highest degree in the history of this country. So since we've been monitoring real estate data from 1980 forward, it has never been this constrained, where first-time buyers' share of the market is so small as it has been over the last 3 months. It has never, ever happened. That's why you get these crazy house price claims, folks. Obviously, if your first-time buyers aren't buying, your trade-up buyers have to be making up the difference. So obviously, that creates the illusion of further house price gain. I mean, it's grade 5 math. This isn't complicated, as I continue to repeat here. What you're looking at here is the Bank of Canada making an interest rate decision without understanding how, right now, I'm assuming it's somewhere around 30% of your economy. About 30% of the Canadian economy is tied to house price growth in this country. About 30% right now. You're going to make a decision without knowing what's actually happening to that 30% of your economy? I think it's you know, I don't know. I don't even know how to say it, Jim. When I started on this journey back in 2010, when I started finding out that everyone believed organized real estate, it took me 3 years before I could actually believe people were ignorant. It wasn't that they were foolish. It wasn't like they were lying. It's just they are simply ignorant to how a housing market functions. Here I am today now, another 4 years later, 2017. The Bank of Canada is going to make an interest rate decision, not knowing how 30% of your economy is being driven in the previous month. I just think it's just lunacy.
Ross, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Hey, thanks a lot, Jim.
My guest has been real estate expert Ross Kay from thewealthyhomeowner.ca. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Questions for our guests or the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.